Hi, I'm Mark Banicevich. Welcome to Governance Bites. Today, I get to spend some time with Myles Allan. Thank you, Myles.
Absolute pleasure.
So, Myles has got a strong background, starting out actually years ago in the UK doing business analyst work, but about 14 years ago started a company called Mosaic Financial Services Infrastructure, which has now grown to a business with 80 people and is in the consulting space for financial services, insurance, funds managers and those sorts of things, and has of course through that process had to establish an advisory board and has some exposure to governance in that space, and of course leading a large team. It's been a very important journey. So thank you very much for your time, Myles, and for the opportunity for the conversation. We were saying just before how governance for you was something you kind of fell into, which I think is probably the case for a lot of people, right? Particularly in the not-for-profit space. Mm-hmm. People will come up as they're passionate about it, whether it's a sport or a charity or something, and then they'll work their way to the point where they get invited onto the board. And so it's a common approach. But the topic we're going to talk about today is about meeting minutes, which is an important area for all evidence of what happened is really, really important. So thanks for the chat.
Not at all. I'm looking forward to it.
So the first question, I'm going to ask you, what is the purpose of minutes? Why are they important?
I sort of come at this from the project management perspective. So you need to be going into any session, regardless of it being a board meeting or otherwise, with a view of what you're trying to achieve, some objectives, and also some motions, things we want to discuss, things we want a decision on. So it follows that the output should be discussion points, but not verbatim. I think we touched on this earlier.
Yeah.
I want to know what the actions are, I want to know who's responsible for them, and I want to know when they're done by, which level of granularity, but if you don't put bounds on things, you might say our industry is very adept at kicking the can down the road. We try and avoid that. So it's just a record of what's been decided and why and what the actions are and who owns them and when we're expecting them by. So I think that's the guts of it.
Right, yes. As you said, we were talking before about the experience of being on a board where somebody would take notes that were basically verbatim. Everything that someone said was on the paper, and it would take you twice as long to read the minutes as it would actually be in the meeting, and it's a really ineffective method. So you certainly want to be far more abbreviative in the notes that you're taking, but you want a record of the decisions that have been made.
Absolutely.
And as you said, very importantly, who's responsible for the actions, what the deadline is for those actions, and you had said before as well about having a couple of discussion points, or a couple of the key reasons why that decision was made. You capture those in the minutes as well?
Absolutely. If we've seen, so we've got a strategy, and if there's anything that is a change in the strategic risks that we've identified that impacts on our strategy, then that needs to be discussed. So that can be anything from, I don't know, one of our customers, their ownership changes, anything that's a risk to one of our key indicators. Sometimes it's something like a technology change. So we have AI coming in from left field and we haven't accounted for that previously in how we're going to approach our customers or the way we're going to solve problems, then that needs a discussion. So this has arrived, what are we going to do about it?
Right. Yeah, so having a couple of those key reasons and the key points that came out would be very valuable. Mm-hmm. We were also talking before about a board that I've been on, international boards, so a lot of different languages and cultures and stuff that are involved in that in that dynamic. And the approach that I actually took the minutes for those meetings, and we took them according to Robert's Rules. Mm-hmm. And Robert's Rules of Order were written in the early 20th century by an American based on how British Parliament was run. So that was very much a motion being moved and then somebody seconding it. And a lot of people don't realise you don't actually take note of who seconds a motion. Mm. We tend to think of seconding as being in agreement with a motion, whereas seconding is just, I want to discuss this. This is open for discussion. So you don't record who seconds it. But then at the end of the discussion, and none of the discussion is written down, you just have the words of the motion, then you vote on it, and you write the result of the vote, whether it was passed or defeated by majority or unanimously. And that's really all the minutes contain. And not having those discussion points ends up potentially being a weakness further down the track when you say, why did we make the decision? Why did we go that way? And if there's any arguments that weren't in the original board paper, they're not captured. So I think catching those discussion points is a really key element.
I think at least at some level you've got to show that the thinking has been done. And that's why we reached that particular decision. So we're pretty hot on that.
Yeah.
And I think coming back to your other point, I was reminded of we used Otter AI to record our minutes for a little while.
That gets you verbatim minutes.
It does and it doesn't, because it's doing a lot of guessing.
Right.
And particularly if you have people sitting different distances from the microphone.
Yes.
And maybe it's the New Zealand accent and the fact we only use 4 vowels. It tended to trip it up
4?
a little bit.
I thought we only used 1.
On a good day.
The schwa. Yeah.
So it ended up reading like a Monty Python script.
Wow.
So we did that for a few weeks and then we went back to you've got actions, resolutions, decisions, and for information. So we've been pretty hot about, if you can get it onto one page, all the better.
Right. I think using that sort of recording and things is improving now. For one thing, everyone would have to have a microphone or access to a mic to be captured. And then throwing into something like Otter is great if you want verbatim, but as we said, you don't want verbatim. No. But AI is getting a lot better at summarising and pulling out action points, right? The key thing is, though, you've still got to go through and read what comes out of it and make sure that you're comfortable with it.
And the overhead involved in that is significant.
Yes. Yes. Well, actually, that brings me on to the next question. How do you then ensure accuracy in the minutes of your meetings?
Get them issued as soon as possible after the meeting.
So it's fresh in their minds?
Yep. And that's got to go around the board members. And any variation or amendments there too, those need to be tabled as soon as possible. Does that always happen in practice? Probably not. Life gets in the way, but that is the intent anyway.
Well, I think that if you're paying board members as well, then that's their job. So, as you say, you've got to get the minutes out as quickly as possible after the meeting so it's fresh in people's minds. I've spoken to an experienced director and chair who says one of the key things he does at the end of his board meetings is he destroys his notes because they're all discoverable. So the board papers are there, the minutes are there, but his handwritten scrawls and things about his ideas and stuff he destroys. And so if that's happened, then the only thing they've got to rely on is those minutes and what's in the memory. So you want to get out very quickly. So if the minute taker who's also getting paid gets that out according to their job very quickly, then the board members have got no excuse not to read those quickly. No. You have, because it's your company and you've got other things on your plate and it's ultimately your responsibility, so suck it up.
Yeah.
But as you say, it may get stretched out by other work. But ultimately, the earlier you look at them, the fresher it is and the better you can do with it, right?
And again, it's my job to hold people accountable for doing that. So, although this time of year, that tends to get stretched out a wee bit.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, it does get a little bit into the season of catching up with people and going out for a couple of quiet drinks, doesn't it?
It does. But we box on nonetheless.
So do you then have a December board meeting?
No.
Right.
No.
Yeah. And do you have one in January or do you have the next one?
You
have it late January?
Yep. Yeah. So we've, as everyone's probably observed in our industry, it's been an interesting year.
Yes.
And the status quo is not anymore. So we're having to have a good think about how we respond to not only what's happened in 23, but what's likely to happen in 24. So the sooner we get down to that, then the better. Yeah,
I think it is quite common in New Zealand to have 10 board meetings a year, and as you say, late January through to late November. But December just gets too busy, and then January we're all at the beach. So why would we have a board meeting then?
Oh, exactly.
Yeah,
and
right.
You need some time out, and no doubt we'll all be thinking about the various scenarios which we're going to have to discuss. So but rumination time is never a bad thing. Yeah,
it's often when directors will do a little bit of reading around the subject and the industries that they're in, isn't it? And they'll get the sort of ideas about where things are going and what's around in the marketplace, and then come in with some fresh thinking in the new year.
Yeah. No, exactly.
Well, thank you. I'm going to finish off with one question. What's the best advice you've ever received about governance?
And this is going to sound really basic. Yeah, I'll go there.
Best advice often is basic.
Yeah, and it was you need an advisory board. My predisposition is to, I guess, I do seek advice, but do I do it in a structured enough way instinctively? Probably not. This enforced a discipline on me as a business owner. We scaled rapidly.
Yes, you did.
And we're up to 80 odd people now, and that constitutes a big company with some significant risks and issues to deal with. Heavy overhead. And Mike Stobbs, who was, he was a mentor for a lot of years. He's still on our advisory board. He suggested that a board might be in order. We started out with some formal governance, and as an owner, I sort of thought, there's a level of oversight and advice that I want, but I don't necessarily want to be constrained by a traditional board structure. There's things I want to be able to do as an owner without having to defer to people. So we struck some middle ground.
Yes.
And reaching that accord was...
An advisory board can be a good structure for that, because you're not handing over control of the business, whereas a governance board, they're making a decision, whereas an advisory board, they're giving you advice.
Yeah.
And you as the owner get to step away and do what you want at the end of the day, which is really important in your situation. As you say, I think one of the things that an advisory board, and it can be done with a mentor as well, is putting some robust structure around the process of governance, or often when you sit down and have an informal conversation with a mentor, which I think is what you're alluding to, you'd be focused on certain points, but you wouldn't really use a strong agenda and work through all of the major points.
Exactly.
And things would get missed and wouldn't get discussed. Whereas you move to an advisory board, put that robustness in place, and it is possible to do that with a mentor. It just has to be considered and done deliberately.
And you've got to, with the mentoring, you tend to do it in 1 hour chunks.
Right.
Because you try and fit it into your general day, and we're all...
Coffee catch up.
Yep. And the hour's never long enough, and to your point around the structure of the agenda and the things you've got to get through and discuss, you never get there. So, and I think it's one of the other things we're talking about as well at some point is the diversity of thought around the table.
Yeah, we'll get to that next time we catch up.
Yeah. So having the structure and being able to tap into that has been incredibly valuable.
Magic. Okay, so Myles, thank you very much for your time.
Oh, absolute pleasure.
Good chat.
Always good to talk about my company.
Thanks, mate. I'll look forward to catching up soon.
Okay.
And we'll see you next episode.